Okay, part three of our massive report on Star Trek canon after this. Hello out there, I'm the oldest nerd, and in our third installment here, we want to continue on talking about novels and games and comics. Now, Gene Roddenberry had specifically said from early on that novels, games, and comics would not have any effect on canon for the show, and in fact instructed the writers not to consult any of these kind of things in order to make any kind of clarification in the shows coming up. As it would happen, though, that sometimes did happen. Now, the one example that is the exception to the rule is Jerry Taylor. Jerry Taylor was a producer for Voyager, and in fact wrote two novels, one called Mosaic and the other called Pathways, in which these were novels that were written in order to help the writers understand the characters and where the show was going. And so these novels actually are canonical in a way, although some of the later episodes of Voyager did not have went away from the precedent set in these books and went in a different direction. And so once again, we will count canon as what appeared on film, on the show, on television, and ignore those parts that contradict the books. But they were considered a writer's guide, they were considered canon, and they are canon unless they've been contradicted in other episodes. But that's the only example where any books would be considered canonical. Now, some people go by the Star Trek Encyclopedia, the Star Trek chronology, the tech manual for the original series, for TNG, and for DS9. And some of these were done by Lakuta and Rick Sternbach, who were art and technical director for The Next Generation. And they were hardcore Trekkies. They did their research and generally were pretty accurate in what was canonical and what wasn't. And while they considered their work pretty official, in Akuta's words, pretty official, he did not say they were canonical. But they did offer these books as well as tools for writers to consult for the technology and for the history of the Federation and of Starfleet and of the general ways that things have to be done in Star Trek. This is something that is similar to a production Bible, but was available to everybody to see. So they have been, however, as always, used as a reference, but not always strictly adhered to. One of those references is the Klingon Dictionary. Klingon started as a way to at first in the motion picture, the Klingons were going to be speaking English, and they decided that they would rather do it in Klingon with subtitles, and they went to James Doohan, who was a linguistics expert of sorts, and created a few words of Klingon language. So if you want to know who invented the Klingon language, that was James Doohan. He also invented Vulcan, which was used in the same picture. And only a few words, though, just enough to get through the scenes. But a writer by the name of Mark Oakland took these few words and then created an entire dictionary of Klingon in order to flesh out the language. And there have been courses in the Klingon language, and people learn how to speak it. Unfortunately, on the shows, once again, the Klingon dictionary was used as a reference, but not necessarily a guide. Sometimes it was too clunky to look up all the words they needed, so they would look up a few and then just make up the rest. And so Klingon has been very loosely applied in The Next Generation and in subsequent shows. Vulcan was interesting. James Doohan did this. They had, in both cases with Klingon and Vulcan, they had originally said their lines in English. And so what Doohan did was watch the film of how their mouths moved and used different sounding words that would cause the mouth to move in the same way. A very clever way of looking like you're speaking another language rather than English. It was very clever in those days of fairly limited special effects compared to today. And finally, we want to say something about the whole idea of canon and what Gene did and what Gene didn't. Gene Roddenberry said in an interview that he really wanted Star Trek to continue after his death, and for his work to be considered a humble beginning of a much bigger thing. So he expected other producers and other writers and other actors to come in and expand his universe and keep up with the times and make it something that would continue on. And so while we talk about canon and what Gene would have wanted, let's think about what Gene really wanted. He wanted something that would be lasting, and Star Trek has been. It has lasted him, and it has improved in some cases. It hasn't in others. But in the same way that when he was in charge, you had your good and bad episodes, you had your good and bad series. But in the end, it is something that is truly revolutionary in science fiction. And aren't we glad that he was around? So I'd like to know what you think about all three of these videos on canon, and if you have some different ideas of how canon should be interpreted, I'd be interested in hearing that as well. Meantime, please do subscribe. My subscribers have been kind of low, so I would like to see people who have not yet subscribed, and most of the people that watch these videos have not subscribed. Please do. It doesn't cost you a penny, and it does do a lot of good to help continue our channel here. So thank you very much for watching, and don't go far.